In this video, I'm going to be drawing a Florida scrub jay. Welcome, my name is Lily at Little Nature Art. Thanks for joining me here today. So today we're going to mostly be using oil pastels and colored pencils. I have this set of oil pastels that I got from a secondhand store many years ago, and I really haven't used them that much, so I wanted to try experimenting with them here today. And looking through my bird book here, I found this beautiful Florida scrub jay. I always loved this color blue, and so I figured that this was a great bird to try these pastels with. So I'm starting with using a blue just to put a base outline and colors down for this bird. I'm approaching this kind of the way I use watercolors. I like to lay down a base color that then I can apply more details with the colored pencils over afterwards for a mixed media approach. So for example, with this reindeer that I drew previously, I did a nice watercolor wash first for all the different color sections, like the gray head, the pink ears, and then I went back over with colored pencils to add in the details and give it a little bit more variation to the coloring. So kind of using that same idea here, but with the oil pastels. And whatever I'm using to lay down that base color, it's nice to be able to cover a large area kind of fairly quickly, but then also to be able to smooth it out so it's a really even foundation to go over it. So these pastels worked really well for that. Using them in this way, I started with, as you can see here, just doing a very quick layer of the bottom color that I wanted to use. I layered it on fairly close together, not leaving a lot of gaps, but not super thick. And then this also helped to kind of cover up some of those initial sketch lines, but still leaving enough detail for me to see the placement of everything. And once I felt like I had enough of the pastels on the paper, I just took a crumpled up piece of paper towel here to smear it around and blend it in some, and then also blending it a little past where I had applied the really thick pastel just to give a little bit of color to even those white areas. And looking at this, I said there wasn't really that much pigment on the paper, but it was still able to blend in and give that really nice smooth layer. So then I switched to colored pencils here. I'm using my Prismacolors, so they're a little bit soft of a lead, so they blend pretty well. I noticed though with the pastels being down first, they applied a lot more different to the paper than I was used to. It was just a different sensation of how the pencil was gliding over the paper. When I first started, it almost felt like it was kind of rough going on, or like it was pushing the pastel to the side almost when I was using the colored pencil, but then most of the time it felt like it was going on almost too easily, almost like if you're using like acrylic paint and you had like a layer of white down first and then you were applying a color on top of that, and it applies more smoothly and blends out. It was kind of felt like that honestly here compared to when I've used watercolor as my base layer. After the watercolor dries and I go back over it with colored pencil, it felt very similar to just drawing a normal paper. It definitely felt different here with the oil pastels as the base. Right here is kind of a good visual for that effect too, which might help me explain it better, where when I was applying the darker blue on top of areas I had the oil pastels, it filled in almost like I was already like burnishing the area. But then like for the dark shadowed area for the back wingtip, you can see where the paper is coming through the colored pencil that I just applied, versus if that area probably had been first oil pastel, the colored pencil seems like it goes on a lot more smoothly, which then it can be good or bad depending what you're going for, but what I was noticing is it would come out a lot darker, like I was applying more pressure than I actually was. So yeah, it's not good or bad, it's just something I noticed, and the more I use these two mediums together, the better I'll be able to judge how these two mediums will interact with each other. And that's kind of why was doing this drawing this day, because I wanted to see how mostly that oil pastels would just work to begin with, because I say I really haven't used them, but then also how layering on the colored pencils as well, how that would go, just so I can see if I like it and experiment more with what I can do with these two. And so I kept kind of applying the details here with the colored pencils. Again, like kind of seeing how where I'm putting the colored pencils on the plain paper versus areas that we had gone over with the oil pastels first. Kind of a big difference there, but still really working well for being able to add more layers. That was what I was kind of worried about initially with putting the oil pastels first. I didn't know how much more blending or layers I could put on with the colored pencils, or if they would kind of prevent me from changing it too much afterwards. But I was really happy that it seemed like I was able to do really anything I normally would have done on top of the oil pastels as well. So it let me really have a lot of control over what I was doing. I had initially planned to do more of the drawing with the oil pastels, but even just laying down that initial base layer, I realized kind of the limitations of precision I could get with the oil pastels. I imagine I could sharpen them or shave off the corners to be able to get a more precise tip, but I just didn't really want to go that route yet. And so once I saw how rich of coloring base I was able to get with the oil pastels, I just switched to the colored pencils and then got carried away with that, and I didn't really come back to the oil pastels for a while. But I'm just a little bit more comfortable with the colored pencils because that's what I primarily use. So I think then as I was adding in some more of these details, I got really focused on that, and then kind of had to consciously, I saw the oil pastels to my side and I was like, oh, that's right, I was really excited about using these today. So then I try to use those as I was bringing in different colors. But really, at least for what I did here today, I didn't really use the pastels for any of those finer details, but having a harder colored pencil, something to keep sharp and have the tip be very fine, that unless you're trying to do something completely oil pastels, I'm happy just switching back and forth, and that's why I've really been enjoying the mixed media lately. But as opposed to doing something completely in colored pencils, though, I also was really happy with just how rich of a base layer these oil pastels gave. I feel like with a lot of the colored pencils, to get that rich of color, I'd have to be pushing really hard and using a lot of lead, and then also by the time I get that level of color down with colored pencils, the paper is pretty much saturated. But as I mentioned earlier, with the oil pastels, that level of color, and it was just like I had a clean working surface as far as how much more colored pencil I could put on. So to kind of compare these oil pastels to my normal approach, which is using the watercolors for the base, I'm mostly just working in a sketchbook intended primarily for dry media, so I've had problems with the watercolor. I don't use a lot of water to begin with, but if I'm trying to get a couple of layers on or a little bit of color gradation, the paper buckles and gets the little warps in it really fast, just because it's not designed to hold water. And then not having to worry about that with these oil pastels, I feel like would make it a little bit more enjoyable, because otherwise with the watercolors I'm trying really hard to do it quickly, so that way the watercolor's not drying. Because I'm using such little water, there's not a lot of time to fill in the shape and then make sure that I'm not getting areas that are drying, and then when I come back over to fill the shape in, I'm either picking up pigment or leaving very defined wash lines. So not having to worry about that, and then also having kind of more options with coming back and adding maybe multiple colors, or just adding a little bit more even after I put the colored pencil down. I think that would be a really nice option to have to be working with these. But with the watercolor, I think I have a little bit more control, and then too with options for color mixing. But at least like for this paper, these oil pastels do solve quite a few of my problems I had been having with the watercolors. But then for as far as some of like the handling and color mixing, right, this is my first try really using these for a sketch, so it'll come with practice too. The last thing that really stood out to me also was being able to use the pastels for doing my initial sketch and then just going right into coloring the base layer, because otherwise with the watercolor I would still kind of do a pencil sketch first to get the line work done, and then I would lighten that up and come through with the watercolor afterwards. And either in that process, if I lightened up my pencil lines too much, I wouldn't really be able to see them after I had the watercolor wash down, unless I had a really thin wash, which then kind of took away some of the point of having a nice base layer down. But the alternative of that would be to leave the lines fairly visible, which then I would, if I didn't want those to show, I'd either have to do a colored line work on top of them, or just keep that really those really like sketch line vibe present. But with the pastels, I like kind of the workflow of having the initial sketch there and then kind of blending it into the base layer as I was going, and then the sketch lines kind of seemed like they took care of themselves. So yeah, that was I guess like kind of another pro of these. And then the one thing I'm undecided about is kind of just the texture sensation of putting the colored pencils on next. I think it's something I would definitely grow to like, but right now it's not something I'm used to, so it was just kept me on my toes, I guess, throughout the drawing. But I like the kind of flexibility that it gave for adding extra layers or shading with the colored pencils. So that's the Florida Scrub Jay. Thanks so much for watching and following along with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Please check out my channel if you enjoyed this video and want to watch any others. Bye!